Prof, perhaps to start the conversation here, when Emmanuel Macron says to Larry Fink and the rest of the World Economic Forum that Europe needs to rethink and reconsider its security priorities and its economic independence, does that begin to sound like the words that would signal a rethinking on NATO?
It absolutely does. And this is not about Greenland. It's about the future of the border. And the Africans have a great interest in the liberal order, sovereignty, sovereign equality, multilateral, and not regional hegemony.
Yeah. Is there still a place for NATO in the global order that we find ourselves in right now that seems to be increasingly more polarized, where multilateralism has proven to be as brittle as one would hope it to not be?
Well, it's been very resilient for 50 years, and it's due to have a renovation, and yet the uncertainties about the United States have sown the seeds of discord in the NATO alliance, and the liberal order that I mentioned before, Oliver, is dissembling, and that's very important to South Africa, who is a multilateralist, and the U.S. was a multilateral for its own interests, consensus builder, and it would have deviations from time to time and interventions in Africa or Latin America or whatever now. But this Maduro seizure in Venezuela is really the first signal of a really determined Donald Trump, and he's going to name, I think, everything like the Institute of Peace or the Kennedy Center, and maybe he'll if he gets Greenland, it'll be Trump land. But I don't think that the NATO allies are really determined not to have that happen.
Yeah. I think very importantly here, it seems to me that this is an empire facing an existential crisis. And every time the world has had to deal with an empire facing an existential crisis, there's been a reordering of the global order. In fact, NATO was sort of born out of exactly that sort of conflict. And while this might be a vanity project for Donald Trump, for Europe, it's certainly not. What are some of the important considerations Europe needs to make, given the almost inextricable economic ties and interdependence it has with the United States?
Well, it's up for the American voters in November to determine whether or not Congress is a check on Donald Trump. I've never seen as precarious a situation politically in this country and in America as I've seen following the news from Washington and around the country, and the ICE immigration authorities in the metropolitan areas that are basically Democratic are recipes for discord and for conflict. And Trump is not above that. And in fact, he's fomenting it.
Yeah.
And he said in a AI generated picture of him in Greenland holding an American flag. It's not Trump to prescribe of a sovereign country to surrender, and I think that the Europeans are going to stand firm.
Yeah, very importantly, and I think part of the consideration with regards to whether the direction Europe goes in right now seems to be determined by whether or not, as you say, in November, the American voters decide to prioritize common sense leadership and common sense politics here. But all while that is happening, there seems to be a cognitive dissonance that Europe has right now, that it can defend the sovereignty of Greenland, a semi-autonomous land, on the one hand, and stand behind Ukraine, but it can't apply that same sort of empathy and logic on Gaza and the people of Palestine. And this week, those exact leaders, along with Donald Trump, are meeting on the question of getting this supposed board of peace off of the ground. Do you see that becoming a success, given the cracks and, of course, the division that we're seeing seeping through the crevices between the relationship that Europe has with America at the moment?
Well, I've got a lot of friends that were working at the U.S. Institute for Peace, and I know the history of that institution very well. And now it's been renamed the Donald Trump Institute of Peace. And I don't think that many governments are going to find the $1 billion to join the board that is apparently talked about in Washington as essential. But in any case, I think it's as your correspondent in Washington indicated, it's a big confusion right now, and so I don't think it's promising at all. And I think that South Africa has been a very principled proponent of justice for the Palestinian people. And so it's not going to happen. I don't think in the Institute of Peace.
Yeah, but if Trump has it his way, he'll either fork up the $1 billion to join the board or face additional tariffs. Prof. Stremlau, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Always fantastic speaking to you.